smiling faces. I'll take you there. Light to the races. I'll take you there. Oh, I'll take you there. Oh, I'll take you there. Mercy now. I'll take you there. I'm calling for mercy. I'll take you there. Mercy, mercy. I'll take you there.
I want to welcome you to our Black History Month celebration and community conversation. It has been quite an exciting activity. I had a chance to interview and talk with some various members, and it was very insightful even for me. So we're going to get started. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to move to my overhead. And, yes, this is Black History Month celebration, community conversations with the city of Richfield. Our theme for this conversation is ACE, Race, Then and Now. Again, with the city of Richfield, I'm Bill Green, new to the city of Richfield, to the administration. I have this beautiful opportunity of talking about equity and inclusion, and I'm excited to be here. So today we're going to have this conversation about Black History Month and some perspectives on that. Moving forward, to kind of set the pace and the stage for this conversation today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about one of our founders of what we call the father of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, his expressions on this. It says here, the celebration actually began, it was called Negro History Week. And Dr. Carter, actually along with other Black scholars, he chose the second week of February to honor Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. Wow, from two different backgrounds, but all of them had a mission about, again, this conversation. In 1976, the celebration was expanded to the entire month of February. So, wow. Well, I'm going to share with you a quote from Dr. Woodson, and it should set the pace for why we are celebrating Black History Month. It goes like this. Dr. Carter said, we should emphasize not Negro history, but the Negro in history. What we need is not a history of select races or nation, but the history of the world, void of national bias, race, hate, and religious prejudice. There should be no indulgence in undue eulogy of the Negro. The case of the Negro is well taken care of when it is known how he has far influenced the development and civilization. Wow, that is a quote. With that quote then, it was then that Dr. Woodson, along with many others, Black scholars, sought to appreciate, celebrate, and educate the African-American experience in America and the world, and give a sense of the reality, the truth, and the miseducation of Blacks and Negro. The quote is a reference from Dr. Woodson's renowned book, The Miseducation of the Negro. The book was an important scholarship addressing race, racism, hatred, and systemic injustice of Blacks and Negroes. The book sought to educate all about the unique role that Blacks and Negroes played in the development of a democratic republic called the United States. Then, now, in 2021, we have this moment in our history in the world to appreciate, celebrate our community, nation, and world about the African-American experience. On behalf of Richfield Administration, Office for Equity and Inclusion, we invite all and encourage all to ACE Race, the African-American experience. Take a moment to learn, lead, and support to do community through our great diversity. So that kind of, Mayor Gonzalez, I'm trying to get the right words, but Maria,
yeah,
that sets this tone for our discussion. And so what we're going to do here, I sent you some questions, and we're going to kind of give your perspective on how we can ace race now and then.
I love that introduction. I think that was a really great quote that you pulled, and just giving folks more context as to how this started, and the ideology behind it as well. So I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us in this conversation. Let's start with some of these questions we have for you. Again, our community be very excited to hear again just your perspective, and again, however you want to go. It said, "What African American has influenced or inspired you?"
So before I answer the question, I just want to thank you for that really great quote that you used opening up this segment, from Dr. Woodson, because I will tell you personally, and I know a lot of people feel this way as well. Personally, I just always have such an internal tension around highlighting different, specific cultures 1 month of the year, and saying, wow, this is a great opportunity to lift up the work and the stories and the histories of our different cultural leaders. But at the same time, it can't help but feel that like it's tokenizing, and it can be tokenizing. And sometimes it's done in that way where it really just amplifies what the core of the issue is. And that core is that, as you talked about in the quote, in the quote that you shared, was we shouldn't be lifting up our specific cultures one time in the year, but really our stories, our leadership, our culture should be embedded in every single system, in the leaders that we see in our country. And that should just be a part of our fabric all of the time. And unfortunately, what we know today is that our stories, our histories, the stories of the African American community, they're not, homogeneous, but also that they're not embedded, and they're not told in ways that white culture, white community, and their contributions are given. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm really glad that you used that quote, because it really speaks to the heart of that, but also from the founder of Black History Month itself. So thank you for that. But back to your question of who has influenced and inspired me. I think that's a tough question, because it's not just one person, it's so many people. And I'll say, as a kid, I guess when I thought about this, I thought about it in kind of how did I grow up and what was my influence and connection. And I will tell you, I grew up in a small city in Wisconsin, and my community was very, very predominantly white, and really not multiracial, and extremely culturally diverse. And so when you grow up in a setting like that, you learn kind of as a kid from our history classes and things like that, right? The stories that a lot of us hear all the time about the leadership of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass. But of course, the influence and the leadership of so many African American leaders, those stories aren't shared. And so even though I have been tremendously influenced by the African American culture, as a kid, you don't get that. I didn't get that exposure like so many of us didn't get. And I was the president of our multiracial club in high school. So that was kind of our space where we had time together with African American students, Asian students, Latino students, white students, and that was the focus. But outside of that, as a kid, my influence was very indirect. And, I can think of predominantly having a lot of influence through the music that I grew up listening to. And in my family, and music is such an important part of our culture and community. But I would say kind of, I grew up listening to a lot of Afro-Latino artists like Celia Cruz, Ismael Rivera, a lot of the singers from Buena Vista Social Club were Afro-Latinos and Caribbean Latinos, but also hip hop. My brother and I grew up with hip hop and R&B, and that was a big influence in our life. And my little brother's a break dancer today, and because of that influence in our childhood. But that's what it was like as a kid. And then today, I just feel so privileged and thankful to have friends, leaders that I lead alongside, amazing leaders in our Richfield community that I'm working with from our African community, really towards that vision of inclusion, of equity, and of seeing our cultures as assets and not deficits. So that trajectory has changed.
Yes, come on. Yes. Wow, this those are great echoes again on this first part. And again, learn a little bit about again your own development in where we call the African American community. So you hit on some very key things too that I even sharing as a young man growing up. So again, thank you on that. We're gonna hit some similar, but again, coming at it from a different perspective. I said, and you kind of hit upon this when you talked a little bit about the music, but there may be other things. I said, what aspect of the African American culture has impacted you? What aspect? You talked about music. Are there any other things?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, there's so many things but I will
Yes.
tell you one of the things that's been most impactful for me is the intersection of cultural identity and spirituality and civic leadership. And that's something that
Wow.
Black churches throughout our nation's history have really led. You know, the leaders, our faith leaders in Black churches, you know, they led the civil rights movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s and continue that work today. And so,
Yes.
as a civil servant myself, you know,
Mm.
those are kind of the most important things to me in my leadership. And I've actually learned so much, not just from Black churches, but from all different faiths and denominations
Yeah.
about the intersection of compassion, of love, of building the beloved community.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's rooted in justice and that's rooted in faith. And we have great leaders locally, faith leaders from the African American community who I get to partner with and learn from. So I will say, like, that's probably one of the most influential components of African American culture and spirituality that I've just learned so much from is that intersection of civic engagement and service rooted in spirituality.
Wow. Yeah. Now, those are some of the same sentiments I even share with you again with you and Maria on this as well. Well, let's kind of move here. This another question again, similar, but again, a little different perspective. It said, what has been your experience? And you talked a little bit about in the African American community from your earliest to now. And I think you hit on some of the aspects of justice, being the church early on, being able to have African American music around you. Any other things that you want to highlight at this point?
You know, I think I did kind of share a lot of the response to that previously, but I think like in so many communities, depending on how you grow up, you may or may not have exposure as a young kid to so many cultures. And I think that was kind of the case for me growing up. It was very indirect, but today that's completely different. And I just feel very thankful. And that's an asset that I have, you know, getting to live and work in the Twin Cities. And also like being a part of a wave of leadership of women of color leaders who are leading authentically, and so many of them being leaders from the African American community, whether it's, you know, people that are famous, you know, folks like Michelle Obama or Kamala Harris, but also amazing community leaders who inspire me to lead, like Joyce Marie here in Richfield, or our assistant superintendent, Latanya Daniels, or council members. We have April Graves in Brooklyn Center. We have Mike Elliott in the mayor of Brooklyn Center as well. And so there's Melvin Carter in St. Paul. So it's so great to be a part of this wave of civic leaders of color, and many of them are leaders from the African American community.
Wow. Wow. Again, thank you again for highlighting again some great things that you mentioned. Young Melvin Carter. I actually coached Melvin in track and field when he was coming up.
Wow, it's
We got to
amazing.
compete against him, right? Yeah. But wow, again, appreciate you again sharing that and giving those insight. We're gonna move to the got about two more questions, and then
Sure.
we'll wrap it up. What is your knowledge of the African American experience in the U.S. and the world? Again, you kind of highlighted some of those things. And if there were some additional things you can bring insight to in terms of the overall and how in the U.S. and in the world.
Well, when I think about our kind of nation's history, one of the first things I think about is that our nation has been founded on and was built on slavery, and continues to be the case today. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to run for office, because you step back and you see, wow, communities of color and all different communities are disenfranchised in order to benefit mainstream white culture and community, and that that's how this country was built. That's how generational wealth has been built. That's how access to opportunity has been built. And I think that that's something that has greatly impacted the African American community in our nation. And I also know that, the African American community is not just one community. It's extremely diverse and global. And we see that here in the Twin Cities also, with immigrants and refugees from different parts of Africa coming here and being African Minnesotans and having that identity. And I also know that the African American community has contributed so many beautiful, amazing things to our history, our culture. And like I said previously, in Minnesota, it's great. And nationally, we have leaders today that continue to contribute such tremendous things. So it's this duality of, the African American community has been disenfranchised throughout our nation's history, and that's why we are where we are today, and that there's so much beauty and opportunity, and we have to kind of hold both of those things and face that collective history and that collective future together. But you can't have one without the other. You need to address both. And Minnesota's the home. We have some of the worst racial inequities in the nation, and that obviously impacts what our African American community members earn, access to home ownership, education, health. So this is where we got to do the work more than anywhere else, is here in Minnesota.
Wow. Well, again, Maria, you highlighted some key things about the struggle, of course, but again, about some of the opportunities that we have brought in terms of leadership, various areas of entertainment, movies. But there's that challenge of balancing that and finding that equity as we kind of frame it, and then making sure that that equity is becoming an inclusive part of who we are. And so, yes, I know you want to.
There's something I wanted to add, that I feel like we have this amazing opportunity to lead together now. And I do think that Black women and women of color at the forefront of this. I think of kind of my mom and my grandma and the women who came before me. The generations before us oftentimes literally sacrificed everything so that their children could have, a better access to opportunity. And I feel like in many ways that it's our generation and the folks who are here today and now that I see so many powerful Black women and women of color leading authentically, and that's in some ways a privilege that our families didn't have previously. And it's like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And to lead genuinely and authentically in our culture, in our identity, and kind of bring all of that to bear, because the generations before us didn't have that opportunity a lot of times. And it's like we get to be a part of deciding what that looks like together and not being afraid to lead as ourselves. So that's something I think about too.
Well, again, just the affirmation, as you say, of recognizing what we really bring to the table, to the community, and to the conversation. Yes, can find that balance. Wow, very good points. I'm going to close out with this last question. It said, what is your message? You talked again a little bit about those experiences and how important to the African American community and to the world in celebration of 2021. What is your message? What would you like to leave?
I think my message would just be thanking our African American leaders in our community here in Richfield, but nationally as well, for their tremendous contributions. And to say that the work of all of us is, and that this is work that I'm committed to in my role and as a person, as a human being, is to be working across all of our different groups. To make sure that we move away from disenfranchising groups of people, communities of color, and other groups to benefit others, but that we're working together to lift up our culture, our contributions as strengths and assets 24/7, 365 days a year, and transforming the healthcare system, transforming our education system, our justice system, and that is what this is about, is moving us from that space of disenfranchising some to benefit others, and moving to a place where we know and acknowledge and we build a world that the inclusion and the opportunity and the happiness of everybody is central to every system that we have that influences our lives. Like that's what the work is about. And to just say, I'm excited to continue building that work. I'm excited to lift up the stories, the vision, the ideas of our African American leaders, and to keep doing that work together.
Oh, wow. Wow, Maria, I really have enjoyed this conversation. I know our community members and those who view this will appreciate the perspective that you have given to us this day about, again, the experience of the African American community. Again, it's just a beautiful to have that oversight and that interview, but also the vision that you talked about. And that's really why I like to be here with the city of Richfield. To ace race, to appreciate, to celebrate, and to educate. If we can do that, I know we can continue to navigate, and as you hear this term from me, the cultural landscape, or mandate, as I call, because it's always going to be before us. Those identities, those division, they're going to always, but great leadership has always found a way to navigate. And so I really appreciate, again, you sharing with us here today. Just before I close, did you have any other closing remarks?
No, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your leadership and contributions. And I'm super excited to have you in our community helping us move this work forward in Richfield. So thank you for your leadership as well.
Well, again, thank you. I'll just share for those who are watching, we're going to be moving into a musical portion, but we're going to pause here. And just before we close out, though, I want to share this closing comment from, again, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He says this, and kind of along what you were saying there, Marie. We have a wonderful history behind us, talking about the African American. If you are unable to demonstrate to the world that you have this record, the world will say to you, you are not worthy to enjoy the blessings of democracy or anything else. So he wanted us to know that we are and we shall be, as long as we continue, as you say, to dream the dream and keep the faith, as we would say.